All right, today we're looking at 16th century Venetian art. This was a tumultuous time for the Venetian Republic with all the Western Europe, um, including the Papal States, allied against her and the Turks pressing from the east. As the 16th century progressed, Venice gradually passed Florence in artistic prominence, and the Venetian School of Artists developed into a vibrant, influential force in European art. Uh, Venice is an interesting city, beautiful city, all sitting on water, completely flooded. All the wonderful gondolas. In this lesson, you're going to be able to recognize the characteristics that define the Venetian School of Art, identify the innovative techniques and materials used during this period, and classify those works through material styles and the content within. Early 16th century Venetian art. Scholars who use two terms to differentiate the style of 16th century Venetians from the central Italian counterparts of the colorito, which means colored or painted, and the disegno, which means designed or drawn. Most striking characteristics of the Venetian school is the use of color. Primary feature of the Florentine and Roman artists is their carefully drawn, sculpted, sculpture-like figural forms, and so we kind of get that again movement towards that naturalism, and we're doing that through that that three dimensionality, kind of moving from shape to form. When we get that three-dimensional representation, as we see the better representation of the shadowing and the changes of tonal value as they go around objects and create that three-dimensional stress. So we don't have that flat look anymore. We're getting more three-dimensionality. These terms also hide the fact that Venetians stresses poetic ideals, while the works of the Central Italians favor the intellectual ideas. One of the primary founders of the Venetian style was Giovanni Bellini. This artist was originally trained in the international Gothic style. Bellini's father was a student of the Gentile de Fabriano and was later heavily influenced by Mantegna, who was his brother-in-law. A whole family of artists. Towards the end of the 15th century, Bellini started to paint with oils, which offer the artist a wider range of rich color than tempera fresco painting. Fresco or tempera was often done with dry pigments using egg as binder and that sort of thing. And even the egg itself would taint and tint the color, and so you didn't get a good rich supply of color. Fresco painting had the artist painting putting their pigment into the plaster essentially that they were putting on the walls, and again limited their palette. But oil paints had a rich and vibrant selection to choose from. One of Bellini's more important later works was Madonna and Child Enthroned, which has the Sacara conversation theme, saints and martyrs from different eras placed together in a single composition. There's a softness and radiance that produces a sense of serenity and calm. This atmosphere is not created by the presentation of the figures themselves, but Bellini's use of color and light. The landscapes that appear in apertures of the architectural framework will become an important element of the Venetian style. And you can kind of, again, get a sense for the true representation of the light that would be occurring in this space, as versus the intellectual understanding of what light should look like in this space. This is more representation of what we naturally see versus what when artists would paint what they would anticipate things should look like. If that makes any sense. Tiziano Vecellio, that was a tough one. Better known as Titian, Sacred and Profane Love. This is characteristic of the visual dynamics of the period. Two women, possibly sisters, given the similar appearance, or maiden and goddess Venus, are sitting at either end of a sarcophagus, which is ostensibly used as a fountain. Let me get my computer moved a little bit. And which Cupid plays, while the woman on the left is fully clothed, including her gloves, a um, excuse me, and belt, and holds a bowl close to her body. The woman on the right is nearly nude and holds out a light lamp. The landscape behind two women is different. Behind the clothed woman, they have a forest placed on a hill, while on the right we see an open rolling meadow. lake and in a distant village. Two diverging reliefs on the sarcophagus below the women. Towards the left, a figure that leads a proud stallion, followed by attendants, while on the right, a new man is beaten and a new woman is pulled by her hair. The striking use of color, especially in the drapery, the rich poetic landscape, and characteristic Venetian sky with the striations and sky categorized Titian's work. And we talked a little bit about this when we looked at that Leonardo da Vinci work of the Mona Lisa. And there was speculation as to whether or not it was his because there were two different sort of landscapes, if you will, almost within that same painting. And here we see Titian doing a very similar sort of thing where we see very different landscapes on the other side of these figures. Madonna and Pesaro family in the Friars Basilica was commissioned by Jacopo Pesaro, the commander of the Papal fleet, and as a thank offering for a successful campaign against the Turks during the Venetian-Turkish War. To the left, the commander is kneeling before the steps of the church with a Venetian soldier, and a bound Turk behind him. The flag bears the symbol of the Pope's family, the Borgia, and the Pesaro. Before Jacopo rise, Peter Keys in the Madonna of the Child. To the right, St. Francis, the Stigmata, introduces other male members of the Pesaro family. This is both the majestic dynamic piece and dynamic piece. The main figures are in diagonal order, which speeds the viewer's eyes across to the Madonna, while battle flag and other Pesaro offer balance. Note the striking use of color in the presence of the Venetian sky. Again, looking for that bold, beautiful sky. We're talking about the striations again, probably as we get through here. The really bold use of composition. This is a very striking composition. Most up to now, we see a lot of the other works of art through this period. Everyone's sort of more on the same plane. We see things kind of going back. When they do go back into space, they tend to go back into the center. And we see a lot of work. This one uses a composition where she is off center, she's way to the right, and all this movement is created by this kind of upward right-hand dynamic that has been included. All right, Venus of Urbino. One of the Titian's most famous work was the Venus of Urbino. Though called a goddess, the Venus was probably a mistress of the Duke of Urbino, who commissioned this piece. The work invites the viewer to dwell on more than just the warm golden figure of the young woman and her cascading curls and attractive, carefully studied movement of her arm. The sheet, which has been painted with the masterful blends of color, aids in giving the composition illusionistic depth. The two maids in the open window with the Venetian sky at the back, again, talking about the Venetian sky. The small dog is technically significant as it serves as a pendant or balancing figure. So we kind of think of things as on a teeter-totter. When we look at the visual balance of a work of art, not just that dog, but the woman above and that space kind of all provide that balance to the figure, which is heavy dominant to the left side of the painting. There's an intimacy here of the domestic simplicity that places the whole composition in a warm human temporal reality. Later 16th century Venetian art, Tintoretto. The great master of late 16th century Venetian art was Jacopo Robusti, better known as Tintoretto. His style may be defined as a combination of Titian in reference to the color and Michelangelo, considering the power on the figures of his and the drama of his compositions. And again, if we kind of look here, the color, we see that bright use of color like Titian had. But if you look again at this, there's a lot of figures. We see a real dramatic use of light. Again, a little different than that true representation of the light we saw in Titian's work. Here is again that dramatic representation of light as sort of what the artist would anticipate versus what might actually be reflected within that space. Tintoretto's works were intensely religious and inspired by the Counter-Reformation. Last Supper was completed in the last years of his life. The work is a mystical and supernatural rendition of the famous theme conveyed in diagonal depth. Also, the trait of Tintoretto with that diagonal, again, we saw that sort of used by Titian. It draws the viewer into the luminous Christ. Note the artist's use of chiaroscuro, which depicts that glowing apostle and luminous angels. And remember, chiaroscuro is that change of light to dark that helps delineate and differentiate form from shape, how we can kind of see that three-dimensionality of things as it uses that chiaroscuro change of light. The dramatic, crowded presentation is a far cry from Leonardo's calm and balanced portrayal of the illusion different in that late Renaissance. When we think about Da Vinci's Last Supper, where everybody's on one little table, nice and even, and it's very symmetrical.